Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with hosts Peter DeWitt and Michael Nelson. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter, Mike, and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure that every student is learning not by chance, but by design.
Hey, Michael. How are you?
Peter. I'm doing great.
I feel like, we finished season 8. So you had this brilliant idea that we would put this together. Why?
We have the opportunity to listen to each of these podcasts and over again. And there's just some incredible little clips from each of them that kind of cluster into themes. And, I thought, what if we chose 3 different people that we've interviewed and short clips from each of them and kind of connect them to around leadership? And I think we've chosen 3 great ones for today.
Yeah, we have. And one of the things that I want to say, because I think you are always very intentional in your actions, one of the points of doing this too is to kind of show listeners that they can do the same thing. Like we have 3 interviews that we've chosen from the time that we've been doing the podcast together. But these are actually 3 interviews these are 3 clips we actually show in workshops. And so what we want people to know is that they can actually do the same thing, right? They can take these clips and they can show it during a workshop as well.
We have so many listeners that either on their way to work listen to the podcast, or as they're out walking or jogging, they listen to the podcast, and it's just absolutely phenomenal, and we appreciate that. But as Peter said, these little clips, if you're thinking of professional learning and working with a group of people, having short 2 to 3 minute videos and then having conversations about them, what an incredible strategy to use. So first up, who do we have, Peter?
So we actually have John Hattie. I mean,
there's nobody better to start this than
I know. Let's start with John. The interesting thing that I want listeners to know is what happened after this interview, right? So we were in Australia together in August. We went to John's house. He cooked us an amazing dinner. So we've actually talked about this topic that John talked about with us. We talked about it in a much deeper level when we've been with him. And it's led to some really interesting conversations with participants within our workshops as well. So let's play. It's about 1.5 minutes, and then you and I can just unpack it a little bit.
Say goodbye to slow-paced teaching methods and join an innovative new framework. With Teacher Clarity Professional Learning Workshops, teachers can learn how to double the speed of learning with clear goals and measurable outcomes. Get started today at corwin.com.
This whole season has been focusing on the learner's mindset, because to me, you are one of my biggest influences when it comes to the love of learning and just trying to figure out what the real language is, and common language, common understanding, research, all of that stuff. What have you learned over the years doing the work that you're doing?
Well, actually, that's the subject of the book we've just finished this last couple of weeks. I'm writing it with my son and a couple of others on that very, very question. And I won't put you on the spot here, Mike, but I reckon that if I asked you, what is your theory of teaching, you would probably spend 2 or 3 hours telling me, and it would be a joy to listen to. But then when I said to you, Mike, tell me now about your theory of learning, I think there'd be a lot more silence. And one of my campaigns is, how do we get educators to have a theory of learning? And wouldn't it be nice if it was aligned with the theory of teaching?
Mm-hmm.
I have news for you. Your students don't care much at all about how you teach. They
Mm-hmm.
know that every time they hit a teacher, it's going to be different. Yeah. But they deeply care about learning. And when I do my classroom observation work and the systematic side of that, it's very rare for a teacher to talk about learning strategies. It's even more rare for them to align and teach the teaching strategies as part of the lesson. And we have a whole language that says that if Mike doesn't understand it, we personify the problem as Mike, not as I haven't taught the learning strategies.
Well, I have to start, Peter, because when he said I'm going to put Michael on the spot. If you're just listening to this, you're not seeing my face is in the video, but my face is also on the screen doing this podcast, and my heart still kind of goes beats a zillion beats a minute when he says he's going to put me on the spot. I mean, this is John Hattie, and the other thing I noticed, Peter, was every time he said, the second time I heard a biggest influence, and I just you mentioned that he was your biggest influence. I just broke out into a smile, and it was the same smile in real time. So strange to have to be watching this at the same time. But I'm telling you, John Hattie putting you on the spot. I'm glad he didn't ask me for that answer. But we've had great conversations with the people we work with around theory of teaching, theory of learning, and people have wanted to go deep into that conversation.
Yeah, I do want to ask you that question though, because I actually have wanted to ask you, and I can't believe that I haven't really asked you what your theory of learning is, because after that, I ended up buying 3 more books on the theory of learning. That is the power of John. He was talking about that. And I bought 3 more books on the theory of learning. And I realized that I have several learning theories that I think about. And so what have you been thinking about since he asked you that question?
I've thought about it in many aspects through the lens of my grandkids, if you can believe that. What are the things that I do, the moves that I make, as well as adults that you and I work with. And I'm definitely more of a pause, question, and help the learner construct. So I guess I really feel that if they're in the construction and they help provide that, they're more likely to use it themselves and transfer it into classrooms or transfer it into their own practice and learning. With my grandkids, it's like pause, let them create, feedback, let's move forward. How do we, that type of theory of learning. Does that make sense to you?
No, it does. It also makes me think we're not using one of the clips from Tom Gusky, because we did interview Tom during this season of season 8, and he talks a lot about, unless you're allowing your participants to actually do that work and teach about what they're learning, it's really not going to be as impactful to them. So I would say that interview with John and then our subsequent conversations we've had after have been really huge. Now we're going to go with the Australia theme, because when we were in Australia with John, we actually interviewed Viviane Robinson. And so what I'm going to do is share my screen and show the interview with Viviane Robinson.
I love where she really takes this. I really do like where she takes this, and it broadened my perspective of leadership for sure.
For the years, you said something in an interview a few years ago. Everyone should exercise leadership.
Yeah.
Can you expand on what you mean by that?
Well, leadership is a particular type of influence process. It's not good enough, I don't think, to just say it's the exercise of influence, because there's all sorts of nasty ways of exercising influence, like force, coercion, and manipulation, and we wouldn't call those leadership. So we need to be much more nuanced than just saying leadership is influence. Leadership is influence that is sourced in one's ideas, expertise, relationships, or positional authority. Now, positional authority is available to those who have formal leadership roles, but the other 2 sources of leadership influence are open to anyone: relationships and ideas and expertise. So you're in a meeting, and you're in a team meeting, and you think as a teacher that the meeting's not being run very well, it's a bit all over the place, and it's not very focused, right? So what do you do about it? So we see too many teachers who will do nothing, put up with it, complain and gossip about it after the meeting, because they're not, and in other words, they will not exercise leadership to be able to say, well, I don't know about you folks, but I think we're a bit off the agenda we set. Can we stop and check? That's an exercise of leadership. And it's far too rare among teachers, that ability to actually be helpful, to influence things in the direction that probably everybody wants to go in by just describing what's happening and taking some it's just taking some responsibility, and also being collegial, helping help instead of just waiting for a team leader to dig themselves into a hole or dig themselves out of a hole. They're being helpful.
Right.
And so that's what I mean when I say that everyone should be exercising leadership moment to moment.
So
Wow.
I'm going to start with this one because I know you're a big fan of Viviane. You said that when we were doing the podcast. She is, to me, sometimes intimidatingly just brilliant. I have to admit that when I am around her and when I talk to her, I just feel like I'm in awe of the research that she's done. One of the issues that I think has come up since doing that interview, which is part of season 8, is that, teachers will say, like, I'm really busy. You and I had a bunch of coaching sessions today, right, with our communities of practice that we're working with in Canada, and people are very busy. And what I also think about is not just the actual interview, but the conversation of Viviane and Helen Timperley did a research paper in 2000 where they talked about that teachers contribute to their own workload more than any initiative does because they don't know what to let go of. They don't know what to de-implement. And leaders don't help that either because leaders don't have the conversation about what to let go. So it's very, some of the conversations she's talking about are very hard because it's a communication standpoint. It's how do we talk to each other? So that's what I've been thinking about a lot since that interview.
She is quite brilliant, and you're right. Yeah, I've been one of her biggest fans for a long time, and I just when she talks about leadership, there's certain things that leadership is open to everyone. And I think back when I was a principal and when I was a superintendent, and she talked about leadership is open to everyone when it comes to relationships. Leadership is open to everyone when it comes to ideas. And I just was like, oh, that would be a mantra that I would have in my school and in my school district. And if we had that permeate throughout our culture in a way that we were open and listening, how that might transform the work we do to support students as well as the adults in the system. Just those two ideas, I would take that and run with it, Peter. I thought that just simple brilliance in those phrases.
Yeah, I remember seeing her give a keynote in Scotland, and we were all in Edinburgh, and she gave a keynote that was just fantastic at the World Conference. And she had said, we need to stop talking about change and we need to start talking solely about improvement because people change all the time. It's improvement that we really want to be able to focus on. So her research is really great. Unfortunately, she's not widely known in the United States as much as like a John Hattie is, but she's definitely somebody whose research outside the United States has been it's been highly respected. And it would be nice to see more leaders and teacher leaders from the US get to know Viviane's work because she can be very blunt, but she has it backed up with research as well. So
I don't know.
Go ahead.
I don't know if our people that are not viewing this podcast, but are just truly listening to it, Peter, I want to get into her brain because she has a certain cadence. And I wondered for our people that are just our listeners who are only listening and not viewing it, her brain I think, was making so many different connections as she speaks, and she has certain pauses that are longer than maybe normal. So I don't know if our podcast listeners could catch that, but
Yeah.
she was being very thoughtful in what she said and how she said it.
Oh, she always is, for sure. Speaking of thoughtful, that was a good segue, actually. Thinking of thoughtful, you focus a lot on human interconnectedness. We, the two of us, are very relational.
Mhm.
Anybody who's worked with us know that relationships are incredibly important to us. So the last one that we want to be able to highlight, and this is also from season 8, it happens to be the last interview we did, season 8, somebody that we have gotten to know well over the years, but Marc Brackett out of Yale. What do you want people to know about Marc and the work that he's doing before we watch this 2-minute clip?
There's certain times people come into your life and you think, oh my gosh, this is the right time, right message, all of those pieces. And as you know, I transitioned from the job of superintendent where I led professional learning for the state of Washington. And Marc was our very first in-person keynote post the coronavirus, where we were really shut down. All of our professional learning was done virtually, and he was in person. And his message about just the social emotional learning and the connection of people to each other was absolutely perfect. And his one message that he doesn't say in this video, or one of his messages in his keynote, was simply having us shift our question. It's easy for all of us to say, how are you? Peter, how are you? And what would you say?
I would say I'm fine.
I'm fine, I'm good. It's the normal, typical response. And then you move forward. Mark, um, in his work, says just shift a word. How are you feeling?
Mhm.
From how are you to how are you feeling shifts a mindset, because we're not used to getting that question, and undoubtedly will bring up a different level of conversation, and therefore building a congenial relationship, which we know leads to a collegial relationship in the workplace. And having doing that shift, you've seen me in going into Starbucks and going into different places and asking that question of, the people that are serving us and or who we're just randomly connecting to. And all of a sudden it brings up a whole different conversation. The first couple times I did it, you looked at me and said, "Who are you? Why are you doing things like that?" But
That is that is not a lie. That is true. That is exactly what I was thinking. Because you will just look at, it was, I have to admit, I am friendly, but I'm also shy. And I don't think everybody knows that about me. And so we'll walk into Starbucks, and for me, I don't like attention on myself. And I just want to go and grab my coffee and then I'm going to go. And I walk in with you, and the first question is, "Are you having a good day today?" to people. And their whole demeanor changes. And I have tried to work outside my comfort zone and do the same thing when I'm going into, especially Starbucks, because that's the place that we first shared where you did that. It's important. And I think from Mark's work, one of the things that you and I do is we use the emotion grid at the beginning of a lot of our workshops to ask people to choose a feeling of how they're feeling. And we use Mentimeter so they can put it in anonymously. It's a really good gauge for us to understand where people are in the room, because some people will say grateful, well rested, whatever, and others will say peeved or anxious. You need to know that when your participants are in front of you. And it also, from a facilitator standpoint, I feel like it shifts my thinking to think, how can I be more kind? How can I make sure that I'm not wasting their time when they're there? How can I give them more time to process those kind of things? So we'll
Yeah.
show.
I simply call it building group empathy. You're building
Yeah.
group empathy every time you do such an activity that Mark suggests. And as you cue this up, I think our listeners are going to enjoy these couple minutes with Dr. Marc Brackett.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I'm doing. I'll just do a little bit of a kind of look ahead, to my the next project that I've been working on, which is about emotion regulation, is that I really do think we need a new mindset about it. That the term even self-regulation, right? For some people is the trigger, right? You're trying to regulate me, you're trying to make me control my feelings. Now, in the psychology literature, it's a term, and so we use it. But I really like to think about emotion regulation as learning how to use all of our emotions wisely to achieve goals.
Mhm.
And so we regulate for a reason, right? We don't have to regulate. I mean, thank God. I mean, part of the interesting thing about this work is that, my goodness, if you were checking in with your feelings and regulating all day long, you'd go crazy,
Mm.
right? It's like, I got enough with the regulation. But most of the time, we don't need regulating. Our body just kind of adapts to our environments. We're not always experiencing strong emotions. It's like you get up in the morning, if you're feeling kind of like content or maybe even a little down, doesn't mean you have to do anything about it. You just kind of continue with your day. It's when, someone says something like, I don't like you, you know, and you're activated, or you get that crazy, if you're a leader of a school, you get that parent who shows up in your face and is like, you're ruining my kid's life, or, it's a colleague or it's a whatever. It's when we get activated. The way I like to think about it is when our relationship with our environment changes, that's when we need strategies. And it's important because, I mean, we all have worked with people, especially in education, who don't know how to deal with their feelings. And it's not fun. It's just not fun because, it makes us feel unsafe. It doesn't make you want to provide support. And a list of other, unfortunate things happens, I think. So anyway, learning how to use emotions wisely to achieve goals, to have good relationships, to have well-being, to make, good decisions is the way I think about emotion regulation.
Using emotions wisely,
Mhm.
using our emotions wisely to be leaders.
And I said this when we started the interview with Mark, his How We Feel app is the only app that I have a notification on my phone. So every morning, every afternoon, and it's been really important for me because the self-regulation piece has been important. I do wake up feeling anxious and think, what can I do right now? Or when I'm going into a situation where I'm nervous, whether it be professional, a workshop, or quite honestly, I ran a half marathon yesterday and I'm a little bit nervous before going into the half marathon, and just self-regulating and thinking back on the training that I've done made me more confident when the race started. So, his work to me is really important. And we have to thank him because he had just gotten off a flight from like Japan or something when his book has been translated into 27 languages. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's just those key, you just named, a couple different key parts, and what you described, he put into the words relationship. When your relationship with the environment changes, whether
yeah,
it was going into a marathon or you're beginning your day, or, I think of myself and I think of my son, Peter, of our spouses were not educators and they were not educator administrators. And Hans, as you know, is a building principal, and I was administrator as well. And really kind of getting yourself grounded before entering the house with small kids is what Hans is doing, and what I did when I was raising him. Getting yourself regulated is important. So he talks about those key times throughout your day, not all the time. We couldn't do it all the time, but before half marathon and before these pieces, your relationship with your environment changes. Those are.
well, Michael, I have to thank you. I never even considered doing one of these kind of bonus episodes. And we will probably do this again. So it was a really good idea on your part to say, hey, let's highlight some of the interviews that we've done, because we haven't. I know you feel the same, but I often tell people when they come up to talk to us about the podcast. I often tell people that I'm extremely grateful that we get to do this together, because I learn a lot from the questions that you ask. But the people that we get to interview, and whether they're a known name or not, and what we walk away with a better understanding, and how it impacts the work that we do after we leave the interview, we're both very grateful to be able to do this podcast. But I just know it's had a big impact on me over the time that I've been doing it.
Well, this has been just a treat to do this with you. And if our listeners are interested in listening to the full podcast with John Hattie, Viviane Robinson, and Dr. Marc Brackett, any of those full videos, you can find them on the Corwin website, Leaders Coaching Leaders Podcast.
Yeah. All right. And thank you, Michael. Good to see you. Until next season.
All right. Take care.